What if I told you that Fiona has been watching everything in Five Nights at Freddy's from the shadows without any of us even realizing it? Welcome back to another Five Nights at Freddy's theory, and today we're going to be covering what happens to Fiona after the events of Secret of the Mimic and how she manages to gain control of the entire Pizzaplex. So what exactly do I mean when I say that Fiona has been here from the very beginning? Well, I think Secret of the Mimic is trying to not so subtly hint to the idea that every game that we've played, starting with FNAF 1, F10 and 4 has been there, and the hints start where we find Fiona in-game. Underneath MCM, we can find a prototype Freddy Fazbear's location being built, and in what eventually will become the security office, we can find F10 and 4. She's been mimicking dispatch from this room all night long while she's been plugged into the entire facility. Now, while this is already an interesting flip on the original FNAF gameplay loop, trying to break into the security office rather than sitting in the office and keeping animatronics out, it also feels like it holds more significance that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about. With things like the Goodbye program having a little show, along with the prototype Mr. Helpful on the underground ride saying things like, "Thanks for choosing Murray's," I think that this prototype Freddy's location was eventually going to become part of the Investors Tour. But if that's the case, that would mean that F10 was planned to be part of this prototype, right? Considering we find her in the security office, I think Edwin was going to turn her into the security system for Freddy's. He was going to turn her into something he could sell. A new state-of-the-art security system that's designed to look after each kid as if it's their own, because she was designed to do that in the first place. She was designed in order to look after David. All Edwin would need to do is adjust her so she would look after more than just David. And considering what we see Edwin working on in his office, I think Edwin was the one who initially thought to make the security puppet and wanted it running off of F10. Now, what exactly does adding F10 into the security system of every location add to the story? Well, it sort of fixes a little paradox that we've had with Glitchtrap for some time now. For a while now, many people have believed that Glitchtrap was added into the VR game and then learned from the VR game in order to become Glitchtrap. However, if Glitchtrap is put into the VR game, and that's whenever the development problems start happening, then that means that Glitchtrap didn't learn by being put into the VR game. He instead already had learned to become Glitchtrap before getting put in. Tape Girl even says that once it's added into the game, it begins reworking and even building things that they haven't started working on.
They sent us that stuff in the first place with no explanation, told us to scan it, said it would expedite the process so we wouldn't need to program any pathfinding ourselves. It seemed to take hold by itself. Things started changing. But then, he started appearing.
It should be impossible for a Mimic program to learn from something that it hasn't seen yet, things that haven't been put into the game yet. But if a version of MXES were watching the actual events take place back in 1985, it would explain where it could learn to become Afton. Now, while Arnold wasn't successful in retrieving the Mimic for Fazbear, somebody eventually is, because we see someone in Help Wanted 2 retrieve the MXES machine and move it to where we eventually see it in Ruin. Even if somehow the van in Help Wanted 2 isn't supposed to mean something, we still see that MXES is in a different spot in Ruin than where we find it in Secret of the Mimic, and I don't think it's because they're two separate machines. Okay, so I should probably explain why I think that Fiona and MXES are the same before I continue, right? With Secret of the Mimic's release, we got a huge theory deconfirmed. Tales games. Now, if you somehow don't know what Tales games is, congratulations on missing out on one of the biggest headaches that this community has ever tried to discuss. And also, how did you miss out on this? I mean, almost everyone was talking about it in some way, shape, or form, either trying to confirm or deconfirm it. Anyway, the reason that I bring up the books in the first place is because even though they're not an exact one-to-one to each other, they're still very important for trying to figure out the overall story. Like, even though the story The Mimic is not an exact one-to-one to Secret of the Mimic, we still get some pretty important pieces from the story that still carry over to the games. Edwin still works with Fazbear Entertainment in order to make the animatronics. Both Fiona and David still both die in both versions of the story, and Edwin still beats the Mimic and infuses it with part of his agony. This leads me to believe that even though the games and the books aren't exactly one-to-one, the books still give us important information until the games can catch up. So, let's talk about the storyteller. In The Storyteller, Edwin returns years later to Fazbear Entertainment in order to help them with their new Pizzaplex project, and they're currently trying to add a new artificial intelligence to the Pizzaplex. Now, this AI comes from a white tiger mascot head, and there's not many white tigers floating around the Pizzaplex when we play in Security Breach and Ruin, but there is a giant machine that comes from the late 70s, MXES. This is our game's storyteller, but instead of a white tiger head getting plugged into the Pizzaplex, we instead get MXES plugged into Fredbear's with the Pizzaplex built on top of it. This is also not the only time Scott has given us a story where an AI gets installed into something and completely takes over. Freddy in Space 2, the joke spin-off game that we got about 5 years ago, also matches this theme exactly. As soon as you start the game, it tells you that Lulzhax has been integrated into the lunar base's systems and now has control over the entire facility, along with given the job to watch over Freddy's son. Scott isn't just telling us this story of an AI getting control over everything for fun, he's telling us this because it's important to the game's lore. And the game also has a timer mechanic. Freddy's son was locked out of the base at the beginning of the game, and if we can't manage to beat the game in under 30 minutes, well, Freddy's son doesn't make it. But beating the game in under 30 minutes allows us to save Freddy's son. To me, that kind of sounds like another father that we know who could have saved his son if he wasn't so caught up in his work. Now, while the Storyteller and Freddy in Space aren't enough to concretely say that F10 and MXES are the same, there are other details that I found that also point in that direction. Notice what voice F10 uses throughout Secret of the Mimic. None other than the talented Andy Field, the unofficial voice of FNAF since Sister Location. If MXES was hooked up to every Freddy's location since it got moved, that could mean that F10 has been using the same voice since 1979, the same one that she stole from Dispatch. I forgot to record this earlier, but the first time we actually heard Dispatch's voice was back in Sister Location, and back then, there was a little mystery surrounding this camera since it seems like it's watching us and not the animatronics. Now, with Secret of the Mimic released, we see that F10 has a very similar looking camera installed. So this little mystery, along with how Fazbear Entertainment knows what Ennard looks like, might all come down to F10 being the one spying on us. We also see that each of the mimics in Ruin have different motivations from one another. The Mimic and Glitchtrap both want to release the Mimic from its concrete prison because they want to cause more damage and havoc, while MXES wants to keep the Mimic concealed because it knows how dangerous the Mimic is. F10 tries telling Edwin how dangerous M2 is, and specifically tries saying that anyone who enters the MCM facility is in danger because of it. They are both trying to keep people safe from M2, they're just doing it in slightly different ways. And let's not forget what I think to be the biggest hint to Fiona being the one in control of the Pizzaplex. In the Secret Ruin ending, where we see the scooper arm grab the Mimic, we see the arm move in a very particular way. The scooper pulls its arm back, spins its hand, and grabs the Mimic. A very similar attack to what we see the Mimic do in the parachute ending after we run the Cradle program and the Mimic is no longer wearing a costume. This is arguably the best opportunity the Mimic has had in order to kill Arnold all night, and then it just decides not to. It just grabs the data diver and leaves. Fiona tells us earlier that it won't stop until it catches us, and we even see that in the ending where we just give up the data diver. It hides in our van, attacks us, and drags us back to MCM. Which begs the question, why does it act differently in this ending? Well, I think that in this ending, running the Cradle program moves Fiona back into the Mimic's body. Now, she doesn't get full control of the body, but she at least changes the Mimic just enough to where it doesn't want to kill us anymore. And in the process, she gets the thing that she's been trying to trick us in order to give her all night long, the data diver. Now, clearly, I can't think that Fiona is in both MXES and the Mimic, and I don't, because I don't think the parachute ending is the canon one. I think the ending where Arnold gives up the data diver is the canon one, because if we take another look at the van crashing scene, we'll find something that wasn't in Arnold's van earlier, a mycelium man. In fact, you're not gonna find just one mycelium man, you're gonna find an entire cluster, along with some of the mice that we've been throwing in order to distract the Mimic all night long. These toys seem to show up out of nowhere because they don't show up in Arnold's van earlier, and it's because they're not real. This entire ending isn't real. You really think that the 36-hour sleep-deprived worker is going to go out of his way in order to risk his life when he has the opportunity to leave? No! He's going to do what he thinks is his job, and then he's going to go home. Well, in this case, he doesn't make it home, but you get my point. Now, to be fair, I don't think this is the exact same Fiona we see in Ruin, since she's clearly had a little bit of work done since 79. Instead of being represented by the sun, she's now representing herself as a rabbit. Something clearly has happened in between these two games, we just don't know exactly what, but I think game theory was really close to the answer. Now, originally, game theory said that the glitch colors on MXES, green and purple, represent Charlie and Afton. And looking back, this was a lot closer than any of us originally anticipated. At the time, Fiona was not enough of a character in the books for there to really be any theories on her. Like, if there were, they either just took a shot in the dark and happened to be correct, or they know where Scott keeps his diary, because there's no way that you could come to that conclusion. But game theory did get really close. Like, sure, they don't say Fiona in that video, but if you replace Charlie with Fiona, that video holds up really well today. Like, now that we know that Fiona is an integral part of this story, what color do we see her represented by in Moon.exe and on the screens when we find her? Green.
What's that?
Green.
MXES isn't Charlie and Afton, it's Fiona and whatever Afton did to her after he got his hands on her. He took Edwin's original code and began tampering with it, changing it to be more like him, more like his persona, a rabbit. Now, earlier I mentioned how F10 gets plugged into a Fredbear's, and I can already hear some of you asking, well, how can you tell that it's not plugged into a Freddy's location? And it all has to do with one incident in particular, the bite of 83. While this incident seems pretty open and shut on the surface, we still don't really know what causes Fredbear to chomp down on the crying child. We used to think that it was a spring lock failure, but then we realized that that can only happen whenever the animatronic is in suit mode. So now I see many people attribute it to the pure force that Fredbear is putting out when he's biting down, because it doesn't seem like he stops his mouth movement when Crying Child is put in. But as some very smart people have already pointed out, that is ridiculous. I know Fazbear Entertainment is not supposed to be a safe company, but they're also known as a cheap company. So I can absolutely see them not putting any safety features in case something is put into Fredbear's mouth, but I cannot see them putting the cash down in order to make their bear animatronic have the force to crush a human skull. Like, I don't think you understand this. The force required to break a human skull would be about 2,300 newtons, which equates to about 520 pounds of force on the skull. Every animatronic in this series has a reason for it to be unsafe. Most of them get a pass because they're just haunted, but the sister location animatronics are the best example here because they're unsafe because of their features. They were planned to not be safe. Fazbear here, however, does not have any reason to be this unsafe. Nobody should be designing him to be this much of a danger. That jaw, while being dangerous and could lead to a serious injury, is not causing that serious of an injury without an outside force. In comes F10 N4, our outside force. With her being hooked up to the building, she would have access to everything, including the animatronics. How can I tell? Because that same function is seen all the way up to the Pizzaplex. We talked about the storyteller earlier and how once it's plugged in, it gets access to everything in the building. That includes the animatronics who begin acting out. All of their worst traits begin to intensify after the storyteller. We also talked about how we see this same thing in Freddy in Space 2. All of the characters' worst traits become even more intensified in that game. One of Chica's bosses is seen loving food to the point that she becomes overweight. One of Bonnie's bosses is seen leaning into his bunny aspects and turning into the Easter Bunny. One of the puppet's bosses is seen leaning into its puppet aspects and turning into a sock puppet. And even Foxy, it took me a minute to figure out what his aspect was, but he's always seen being taken apart and put back together. He's always broken, and we see that in his Frankenstein version. The point is, we're seeing all of these characters have their worst traits intensified, except for one unlockable character, Golden Freddy, who doesn't even have a boss fight. He is found in a boss room, but Golden Freddy isn't the one we fight here. Instead, Lolzhax tells us he could only finish building Chica's head, almost like someone else was meant to fight us here, and he had to switch it last second for some reason. This all points me in the direction that at some point Golden Freddy was under Lolzhax's control. Similar to in the game's timeline, Golden Freddy, or Fazbear, was under F10's control. Now, this theory is going to make Fiona much more important to the story, which makes a lot of sense considering not only is she the first one to die now, she's also the first possession. Wait a minute.
I was the first.
She was the first?
I have seen him, the one you shouldn't have killed.
She's seen the one you should not have killed?
I am a burning reminder of your misdeeds.
Is Fiona the one tormenting Afton in Ultimate Custom Night? Well, we can figure that out in the next video. I know, I hate doing two-parters, but I really feel like we've covered a lot here today. We figured out that F10 is most likely MXES. She seems to be our game's version of the storyteller. Arnold might have just dreamt up the parachute ending, and we predicted that Glitchtrap might get revealed to be a branch of F10 in the future. So since we went over all of that here, I definitely think that covering the one you should not have killed deserves its own video. But I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think that I'm wrong that F10 and MXES are the same? Do you think that Arnold just brought a stack of mycelium men with him during the parachute ending? Let me know in the comments down below. And hey, while you're down there, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to see more of me in the future. More than 90% of my viewers aren't subscribed, and it really helps out the channel. Plus, it's free. Who doesn't love something that's free? Thank you guys so much for watching to the very end, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye!